Welcome to Timber and Trades. Today's video is a special one to me and I really hope you enjoy it. I'm going to go through my journey of building this Nintendo cabinet. Why am I building a Nintendo cabinet of all things? Well, I'm glad you asked. To answer that question, I need to tell you a little bit about my friend and neighbor, Andy Cunningham, and the era that we both grew up in. Now, when we were kids growing up in the Midwest in the late 80s, early 90s, I, along with every other kid in the US at that time, hounded our parents for a Nintendo action set. You remember the one, it came with Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, 2 controllers, and the light gun. I think we all had that friend who got one first, and their house was like a circus with all the neighborhood kids waiting to get their turn to hang out and play. Well, until they could annoy their parents enough to get one of their own anyways. Andy wasn't any different from the rest of us at the time, except that his love of the world of Nintendo specifically, and video games in general, resonated with him to the point that it became a passion that would shape the rest of his life. Andy grew up to be the lead rendering programmer for a major video game development company, which I think is awesome because while I have difficulty finding the time to play video games these days, Andy actually makes a living doing it. So anyway, about 10 years ago, Andy started collecting the vintage 80s and 90s World of Nintendo retail displays that he remembered from his childhood, and this led to the massive Nintendo collection, dare I say museum, that he curates today. And he's not alone. There's a really large community of people who collect Nintendo and gaming displays. So Andy, knowing that I was a hobbyist woodworker, contacted me to ask if I could build a cabinet to hold an original Frank Meyer retail gaming kiosk to be displayed at the Midwest Gaming Classic in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA. Frank Meyer was the manufacturer based in Wisconsin that built the original World of Nintendo furniture, and they're still in business today. Now, Andy has been featured at the Midwest Gaming Classic for the past few years. They ship him and his entire World of Nintendo retail displays and Nintendo memorabilia out there where he showcases it to those of us old enough to remember this stuff when it was in stores. And my favorite part, the kids that are too young to have seen these displays firsthand get a chance to experience them. I love the pictures Andy has shared showing the absolute joy these kids have seeing his World of Nintendo displays for the first time. Andy has also written a book showcasing his knowledge and love for Nintendo retail displays entitled The World of Nintendo Book, A Visual History. It's jam-packed with full-color photos and the history of these displays that many of us fondly remember and love from our youth. If you're interested in checking it out, I've put a link down in the description. Well, Andy needs this in time for the convention, so we'd better get busy. To start our project, I'm going to rough cut the parts of the cabinet with the track saw to a more manageable size to run through the table saw. It made sense to me to use my Boris centipede as a cut table for the Melamine sheet goods. Now, these centipedes are handy as a pocket on a shirt, but as you're about to see, one guy lifting a 100-pound sheet of melamine on top of one is ill-advised. Haha, look at his face.
That didn't work.
Oh wait, that's me. It's also a little known fact that if you hold your mouth open while you concentrate, you achieve superhuman strength and intellect. Anyway, this is my first time working with melamine, so I experimented with a couple of different ways to cut it, knowing that it likes to chip when cut or drilled. First, I tried the Milwaukee 48 tooth fine finish carbide ATB blade, and it works really well, even without taping the cut. I find it handy to put a piece of tape on the panel and mark what that panel is with a Sharpie. Nothing like looking at a panel you cut 2 weeks prior wondering what the hell you intended to do with it. Oh, and melamine has an MDF core, so it spreads really fine particles when you cut it, so wear a mask and connect a vacuum when you make your cuts. These RZM3 masks are the most comfortable that I've tried, and come with 3 different ways to strap them to your noggin, so most people should be able to find a comfortable fit. Remember, the best dust mask is the one you'll actually use. Now enjoy the jump cuts of me cutting all these rough panels. I like Tenryu blades, so I thought I'd try their melamine blade. It's an 80 tooth carbide high ATB blade with a .118 kerf that's supposed to be ideal for cutting melamine. Results on that coming up. Next, I'm going to cut all my panels to their final dimensions. As far as getting the best cut on melamine, I found that taping the cut first worked the best. Taping the cut for the fine finish blade on the track saw made for a marginally better cut, but maybe not so much better that it's worth the time it took to tape, since the 48 tooth track saw blade made a pretty nice cut already. The 10 Ryu melamine blade did a decent job, but not as well as a track saw blade. I found that taping the cut was necessary for an acceptable finish with the 10 Ryu melamine blade. In hindsight, I should have tried a $30 cheaper 80 tooth Diablo ATB blade with tape as compared to the 10 Ryu with tape to see if one made the same or a better cut than the other. Let me know in the comments if any of you would like to see a short video of this comparison. I'd be willing to do that in the name of science and saving some of you 30 bucks. Here's a demonstration of the 10 Ryu blade's cut using tape. When using tape, it does leave a nice edge. Ultimately, what I ended up doing was getting my initial edge for the table saw fence with the track saw, then taping the final dimension cut to get identical panels on the table saw. So it's imperative that my bottom and back panels are the exact same widths. The back panel was already cut to final dimension, so my idea was to keep the bottom and front panels square to each other by clamping them to my table saw and then cutting them both to final width with the track saw at the same time. I think it worked pretty well. The bottom of this cabinet is actually an assembly consisting of an upper and lower bottom panel, 3 spacers, and the front panel which will hold the Nintendo nameplate that we routed in the variable router jig video. I'll link that video at the end if anyone wants to check it out. Here I'm mocking up how the bottom assembly will go together. This bottom assembly is the anchor of the whole cabinet, providing the strength and rigidity needed to hold the massive top structure that it's being built to withstand. The standout MVP of this entire build was the Dowelmax doweling jig. I bought my Dowelmax Classic 3/8 kit over 2 years ago, and I think I use it as a joinery method more than any other, including pocket holes, and I don't own a Festool domino. The Dowelmax is built in Canada by a small family-owned company to exacting tolerances and is stronger and more accurate than biscuits, pocket holes, and dominoes according to Dowelmax's testing, taking only slightly longer to use. While the domino is usually considered the Cadillac of mortise and tenon style joinery, I can attest from extensive use of the Dowelmax that it's exceptionally well made, astoundingly accurate, and a fraction of the cost of a Festool domino, like nearly 1/6 the price. I'll go through a more lengthy tutorial of the Dowelmax later in this video when I install the side panels. I've seen other Dowelmax demonstrations on YouTube where a couple pieces of wood are stuck together in a few different ways to show its ease of use and accuracy, but I haven't seen a video yet where an actual project is built with one. I reached out to the inventor of the Dowelmax, Jim Lindsay, and he actually watched my router jig video and emailed me back same day, on a Sunday even, which I thought was a very cool, down-to-earth thing to do considering I'm such a small content creator. So in my communications with Jim, he stated that he appreciates honesty and integrity and would not ask me to say anything about the Dowelmax that I was not comfortable with or that I've personally experienced improving with the tool. If you're interested in checking out the Dowelmax, I have an affiliate link in the description that Jim provided me that doesn't cost you anything to use but greatly helps a small channel like mine grow, and I pride myself on promising to never recommend a tool or product that I do not personally believe in and stand behind 100%. There will be no AG1 or BetterHelp commercials from the channel anyway. I have no idea what YouTube serves up for you. So what's been going on in the background here while I've been yakking is I'm using the Dowelmax jig to join the spacers to the lower panel for the bottom assembly. There it is. That's a nice fit. To line up the upper and lower panels, I decided to use dowel centers to find the first and last holes on each spacer. Theoretically, I could have just laid out the Dowelmax the same on both panels since they were cut to final dimensions at the same time and it would have worked out. But I wanted to try and eliminate as much error as possible and create some checks and balances for the work. So as you can see here, using the dowel centers actually ended up working out pretty well. Alright, first glue up of the project. I'm using this Titebond Melamine wood glue for the first time, and I have to say I like it. It provides a longer working time than Titebond 3 and seems to bond melamine really well once it sets up. So in this segment, I'm making a reference measurement to get the final width of the front panel in relation to the bottom panel assembly. So every time you see a jump cut, I'm actually checking the front panel to the bottom panel assembly, adjusting the table saw fence a little bit each time, sneaking up on the cut until I get the perfect fit. Now I'm probably going to put way more dowels than I need to install this front panel, but I kind of like things overbuilt, don't you? I'm using the dowel centers again to find the middle 4 holes since I drilled them referencing the center spacer. Another cool thing about the dowel centers is that you can use them to locate the Dowelmax with the point of the drill bit. I'll show you that later. I'm also using them to verify that the second row of dowels is lining up properly, which they did line up perfect. That's just part of my process, I guess. Here's just a little dry fit admiration shot. I'm going to blow through the painting the front panel and front edge banding. I'm not a very good painter, but after sanding these pieces down and repainting about 6 times, I finally got a finish that I was pretty happy with. I didn't even end up using these pre-painted pieces of edge banding. I got a better result taping and painting them after they were installed on the panels. Live and learn, right? So here I'm installing the back panel to the bottom assembly. Drilling the dowel holes is very similar to the front panel, but we'll just enjoy the ride for completeness. So as I install the left side panel, I'm going to go into more detail about the use of the Dowelmax jig. I figure by this point you've already seen it in action and probably have a pretty good idea of what it is, what it does, and how accurate it is. But I chose the side panel for the deep dive because I was amazed at how well this panel went together after using the Dowelmax to drill dowels on different planes on 2 panels and have them match up perfectly. So when I start the Dowelmax at the edge of a panel, I like to use a thick stop block or machinist square to make absolutely sure that the side of the Dowelmax is even with the edge of the panel. You can probably save milliseconds using your finger, but this works accurately and quick enough for me. I like my starting hole to be the second guide on the Dowelmax block, especially on MDF or particle board because it's more prone to splitting when you drive the dowel the closer to the edge you get. When I drill, I go about halfway, pull the bit out a little to clean the hole, then drive it all the way. MDF is more forgiving as far as cleaning out the hole, but if you're drilling hardwood or even plywood, it's a good idea. Next, I use the distance gauge to space my holes accurately between all panels that need joined together. In this case, where I'm drilling multiple planes, I'm trying to find a distance that works on all planes so I don't have to readjust the distance gauge. Once you set it, you absolutely don't want to move it until all holes at that distance have been drilled, or if you have multiple distance gauges, but I only have the one. You also might notice that I've put a directional arrow on one end of the distance gauge with a Sharpie. It helps me quickly identify which end goes in the direction of drilling travel from the starting point. Once you find that perfect hole spacing, start drilling. Just remember which drill guide on the Dowelmax you used at any part of the sequence so you can repeat it on the other panel. Ideally, you would use the same guide holes for every dowel hole in the sequence, but sometimes that isn't possible. So here I'm using the bottom assembly as a reference for the Dowelmax. When I drill the side panel to match my back and bottom assembly, I'll use dowel centers to locate these 3 holes. The rest of the holes I'll be able to accurately lay out using the Dowelmax, so I'll drill those holes first to locate the panel for the dowel centers. That part will be more clear later when I actually do it. Here I'm just marking where I want to lay out my dowel so I don't get turned around and drill the wrong side of the panel. Not that I've ever done that before. Now I'm converting the Dowelmax from drilling the edge of a panel to drilling the face of a panel. In my experience, the most time spent with the Dowelmax is converting from edge to face drilling, which I admit better planning on my part could probably remedy a lot of that time. But I can also see the value in having an additional 3/8 jig, one set up for edges and another set up for the face if you're doing this a lot. That would save me a bunch of time and still be way less expensive than something like a domino. I have the 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch Dowelmax blocks as well, but 90% of the time I'm using the 3/8 blocks for my builds. I do have 2 3/8 inch drill bits, one set up at 1 inch for edges and another set up for 1/2 inch for the faces, and that accommodates 1.5 inch dowel on 3/4 inch material. For the face of the side panel, I start with the same hole that I started on the edge of the back panel. I'm going to run the drilling sequence the exact same way, except the 3 holes at the junction of the back and bottom where I'm going to use the dowel centers. And I don't know if you noticed a few seconds ago in the time lapse, I compared my 2 drill bits to make sure I grabbed the shorter one. If I drilled a 1 inch hole into a 3/4 inch panel, well, I would probably start crying on camera, and no one wants to see that. So here's the part I was talking about earlier. I referenced the Dowelmax to the panels that are coming together in the corner. So I'm going to locate these holes with dowel centers, and then use the distance gauge after I accurately locate these holes. Leaving the Dowelmax loose, I insert the drill bit and find the spot where the tip of the bit fits into the hole made by the dowel centers. Then I tighten the jig down and do the thing. Now things get a little more interesting because the jig clamps are still clamping the workpiece in the same spot, but I have to extend the drill guide block deeper into the face of the workpiece. The Dowelmax Classic kit comes with some of the more common shims, but I bought the accessory shim kit to go with it for just this purpose. Between the shims included in the kit and the accessory pack, I've had all the shims I've needed so far, but I've run into circumstances where I've needed to use longer bolts to extend the guide block further than the stock studs will allow. So this part right here has been my only issue with the Dowelmax. If you have to extend the block out with shims, since the clamp stays close to the edge, it pulls the block out a square when you tighten the clamp. I've gotten around this by using, I believe it's a 3/32 setup block under the shims. This works if you're really careful, because if you tighten the clamp too much, it will shift the shims and pull the guide block out a square anyway. And if you don't tighten the clamps enough, your guide block might wander on you. I like the ease of the shims the way they are slotted and just slip on, but I would suggest to Dowelmax that they also make a shim that is the same thickness as the guide block, which would eliminate the need for the setup block spacer. Also, if this new shim had holes instead of slots, it wouldn't move under clamping pressure. Perhaps a 5 or 6 inch pair of studs to go with this as well. Here's where I had to use some, if I remember right, 5/16 by 18 by 5 inch long bolts to extend the guide block further into the workpiece. I just used 5/16 washers to make up for the bolt length that I didn't need. I guess I could have bought some all thread and used the knurled nuts that came with the Dowelmax, and that would have negated the need for the washers. So after I drilled the first hole, I checked it against a reference line I made that represents the top of the upper panel of the bottom assembly. So the dry fit was amazing. I could have asked for a better fit. But this is the part where I realized that the bottom assembly was too deep. See, the front nameplate panel is supposed to be recessed 5/8 of an inch into these panels. After dry fitting the side panel, I realized that the front panel is flush with the side panels. So I have to trim 5/8 of an inch off the front of the bottom assembly. Not great, but it could be worse. Thankfully, I picked up a good quality table saw shortly before I started this build. Unfortunately, the blade height at max was a 1/4 inch too low to take off the whole thing. But with some careful track saw placement, I was able to accurately chop the rest off. I was a little conservative with my cut, so it left a fingernail ridge. One more really fine pass with the track saw got it close enough that I could sand it flat using the lower panel as a guide. After that debacle was cleared up, I drilled the dowel holes for the front panel to engage the side panel, and then it was time to glue the front panel in place. After the front panel set up, it was time to glue up the side panels. I glued the panels one at a time, and I'm just going to show the right panel glue up to save some time. And before anyone says anything, like you guys haven't done a glue up in your chillin' shorts and your flip-flops. I'm building a separate removable base because that's more true to the original design of these Nintendo cabinets, and that's what Andy was going for, as close to original as possible. I started by installing the edge banding on the side panels. Next, I drilled the dowel holes joining the side panels to the stretchers. This was pretty straightforward because I just lined the Dowelmax up to one side of the panel, skipped the first hole, and drilled the next 4. This pretty much centered the 4 dowel holes in the panel, and as long as you start on the same side of each panel, they'll line up perfectly. I decided that I should probably mark the top and sides of the panels so I knew which one went where and in what orientation, especially once I start drilling the center panel. That one was a little trickier. I ended up installing some figure 8 fasteners to mount the base to the cabinet. They work well, but I worry that they'll loosen from the MDF over time, and in hindsight I wish I would have got a cheap biscuit joiner and used Z fasteners instead. I think fastening the base to the bottom of the cabinet would have been easier too. But if Andy has issues later, I can always install Z fasteners at that time. Going forward, I think figure 8s will work better with solid wood. The base glue up went well. I had to switch to 2-inch dowels because I ran out of 1.5 inch. Luckily I figured that out before glue started flowing, but otherwise uneventful. Towards the end of the glue up segment, the base looks bowed, but I think that's an optical illusion from the clamp or surroundings or something, because I would have been stressing out if I saw that in the moment. And in the base installment segment, you'll see that it lines up great with the bottom of the cabinet. To install the figure 8 fasteners to the bottom of the cabinet, I'm using 6mm threaded inserts. I started at one corner and worked my way from one side to the other to make sure the base lined up well on all sides. For the shelf pins, I used a Craig 5mm shelf pin jig. I ran tape where I wanted my holes to help prevent the melamine from chipping out. I also added 2 shelf pins on the backside because I noticed that Andy's original late 80s, early 90s Nintendo cabinets with shelves had a bow to them, and I figured over time with temp and humidity fluctuations that would happen to these melamine shelves too without extra support. And he agreed. As you can see in this shot here, some of the shelf pins blew out a little, but a semi-gloss paint pen fixes them right up. I just dab a little paint on them and wipe off the excess while it's still wet, and it blends in perfect with the black melamine. Of course I forgot to film that, but I think I'll make a short of it and put it out because I think it's a good tip. Drilling the dowels for the top is the same as most of the others. I set my distance gauge to work on all 3 panels, and I'm using where the side panels meet the back as a reference point that I'll use dowel centers to locate. So like all the other panels, the Dowelmax lined up perfectly and the top fits wonderfully on the side and back panels. All there's left to do with this is to paint that edge banding to match the gray on the side panels. So to build the shelf, I just cut it to size, iron on some black edge banding, and voila! We have a shelf. The top glue up went off without a hitch. I'm not sure I've ever had a project with this many glue ups that have gone so well. I wish I could have created some glue up drama for you guys, but it just didn't happen. This Nintendo nameplate's an original that Andy had, which is why it looks a little used, but it adds an element of authenticity, don't you think? I stuck it on the front panel with some heavy double-sided tape so he could heat it up and replace it if ever needed. I probably should have cleaned the cabinet up a little bit better, but enjoy some glamour shots. And I got it done with a week to spare before the Midwest Gaming Classic, which is great because that means I can take it over to Andy's house and make sure the original top unit fits. Just kidding. I took those measurements like 1,200 times. It'll fit, right? So we have a happy ending to the story. The cabinet was done with a week to spare before the Midwest Gaming Classic, which turned out to be only a few days because the movers had to come pick everything up, ship it to Milwaukee, and then Andy had to go set it all up before the show. So it was a touch tighter than I thought, but on time nonetheless. Andy's World of Nintendo display was a hit, as it always is. All the kids, young and old, had a great time checking out the displays and playing the old Nintendo games, and best of all, the cabinet didn't collapse under the weight of that massive top display. Thank you all for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and check out the links down in the description. I hope to see you all in the next one where we start the shop build out with maybe some shorter videos along the way. Take care.